Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about how I draw breasts, but before we get into it, I want to take the time again to thank everyone for their support with my pose reference book, Dynamic Figure Drawing Volume 1. For the uninitiated, this is my self-published pose reference book containing almost 300 individual drawings that I've done over the years. And I'm getting closer and closer to selling out all of my stock, and I have one box left finally, and once they're gone there will be no more. So if you were ever in the market for a book filled with dynamic pose references, and I guess, specifically my drawings, consider checking out my book over in my shop at emiliadecoray.com. Thanks a ton in advance for your support. And now with all that said, let's get into how I draw breasts. Now to start here, let's get the most common advice out of the way, which is to think of the breast as a water balloon. And the reason this is so common is because it probably is the most helpful analogy for drawing breasts due to the fact that the physics of a water balloon, how it behaves to external forces and down to the way a water balloon looks, all of it resembles the way an actual breast looks and behaves. Another common tip even is to think of a breast as a teardrop or like a raindrop. And for me, this is especially helpful when thinking about how the breasts look when they're laying up against a hard surface. If you've ever seen the way a raindrop looks running down a slanted surface, the breast will look nearly the same. And in this analogy, the raindrop, of course, is the breast and the surface is the human body. So personally, whenever I draw breasts, this is just the go-to visualization for how the breast may look as they lay atop the surface of the chest. And depending on the position of the body, even still, imagining the breast as a raindrop against the chest usually fast-tracks the process for me. Now when it comes to the actual anatomy of a breast, it's really surprisingly simple in as far as things an artist needs to take into account when drawing them, simply because a boob is really just a collection of fat that sits on top of the lower area of the pectoralis major, and that's really all there is to it. So for me, when drawing the breast, I just imagine this sort of oval shape that sits on top of the chest like this, and it's really actually quite as brain dead as that. I don't even know what else to say. However, if you look at this diagram of the breast, you can see that the breast actually rides along the lower part of the pectoralis major as it heads towards the armpit. So I like to add on this triangular bit to the oval shape in order to represent that. So as one shape, it almost looks like an apostrophe of sorts. This is why whenever I draw breasts, I like to start at this point here where the chest meets the shoulder, in other words, the armpit, and sort of outline part of the lower chest before adding in the actual breast. Sometimes I even like to think of it as like a question mark sort of line or a hook. Now, real quickly, just to explain what these lines in red represent and why this sort of angle specifically, is that if we draw a chest like this with all the muscles laid out, all the line represents is this part of the deltoid and just part of the lower chest where it meets the deltoid. Take everything else away and we get those lines we had in the beginning. So that's why I like to draw this specific angle, because it's essentially describing the anatomy I need to be aware of without having to draw it all at the same time. Then from here at this point is where I'll add a C-curve for the breast itself. Another way I like to think of it is by looking at it as though I was writing a lowercase letter y to indicate the deltoid and that bit of the lower chest. One thing that I always keep in mind is how the breasts themselves actually sit on the rib cage, because it informs the way they look in different angles. So with this drawing, the lines in blue represent a rib cage, and as you know, the rib cage itself is not a flat surface. There is a rounded contour to the rib cage itself. It's for this reason that when drawing unsupported breasts, they will fall at an angle like this as opposed to straight down. If I were to do it straight down, it wouldn't take long to realize that breasts don't naturally sit like this on the chest. This is actually why I like to take into account the angle of the arch of the ribs when deciding how to draw the underside of the breast, the part that is making contact with the body. Whenever I draw breasts, I like to imagine as though I'm just following that angle of the ribs, and it makes it easier for me to figure out how the breasts lay on the chest as opposed to sort of wondering if it's like this or like this. Again, just following that angle helps a ton in that regard. This is made a bit clearer when we look at it from a 3/4 view. So here we have just like a boxy sort of rib cage, and this arch here represents the arch of the ribs. So when we go to draw the breast on top of this form, if I ride the angle of that arch, it makes it a little easier to see how the breasts may look when making contact against the ribs. Another clear example of the angle of the breast is from a top-down view. Drawing the breast coming straight out like this is incorrect if you're going for a more natural look. Realistically, the breasts come down again at more of an angle like this. This is the reason why if a person is leaning back, for example, the breast will sort of splay outward like this on either side of the ribs as opposed to, again, coming straight down, which would be unnatural. The same can be said for drawing breasts on a figure that's laying down on their back. We have to remember that the rib cage has a rounded contour, so when we go to draw the breasts, they will follow that same contour. Now, one thing that I like to mention that may or may not be a very obvious thing to say, but it's that breasts are two separate forms. Yes, who knew? But something that I do when I draw breasts is that when I get to this point here, I like to draw an arch going across the chest like this. And from this point here, I like to draw a line coming down that point, which then allows me to complete the form of the breasts by drawing a simple C-curve that connects the arch to that line that's in black. And this would be the steps that I take, in other words, like from beginning to end. All of this is simply to say that breasts will never actually connect together like this. This would be incorrect, as breasts do not create cleavage unless they're affected by some external force or factor, like say a bra or just pressing them together. They will always remain two separate forms. And this leads me to how I draw breasts of different sizes. So if I wanted to draw small breasts on this drawing here, I'd simply draw a small arch across the chest like this. Put in a C-curve and you got a drawing of smaller breasts. If I wanted to draw the breasts a bit bigger, then I draw a slightly bigger arch going across the chest, and the whole idea with this is that the bigger the arch, the more space across the chest the breast has to travel in order to complete the shape. So in order to close the shape off, I need to draw a bigger C-curve, which results in a drawing of bigger breasts. And if I wanted to go bigger, that's even more space the breast needs to travel across the chest to complete the shape, resulting in an even bigger C-curve, ergo resulting in a drawing of bigger breasts. Now, say if I wanted to draw the biggest breasts possible on this figure here. What I do is I draw the arch going all the way to the center of the chest, but still leaving a tiny bit of space in between them to keep them separate forms. And so now, as you can imagine, in order to complete the shape, I need to draw a very big C-curve. Now, this doesn't mean, though, that breasts have this sort of fixed size just because I have no more space for a bigger arch. Well, the arch can remain at capacity, if you will, but the C-curve that I draw for the breasts themselves can be as big as I want. Super big like this, or even bigger than that. It's up to your own discretion how big you want to draw them. The only thing I personally pay attention to is leaving a tiny bit of space in between them in order to keep them two separate forms. The way this method is helpful in different angles is that once I identify the center line of the chest, I now know how much space I have to work with when drawing the arch on the far side. Drawing that arch past the center like this would be incorrect, and so this is how I like to keep it in line when drawing breasts from different angles. And the last tip I have for you for now is a simple one, and it's how to find where to place the nipples on a breast. And the trick for that is at this point here, right between both clavicle bones. If I draw two lines at an angle like this, similar to the angle the breasts sit on the chest, at the end of those lines is where the nipples will be. And the same trick can be used for any angle you can think of. And with that, that's going to do it for today's video on how I draw breasts. If you like this video, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to my channel for more art things and whatnot. And as always, I'd like to take a moment to thank my patrons for all of their support. And before I go, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you again as soon as I can.